The day I met Susan was as ordinary as any, yet her energy made it unforgettable. I had just started my first job at a small publishing house, and Susan worked in the neighboring office as an editor. She walked in, introducing herself with a self-assured charm that lit up the room. Her confidence was magnetic, and I was instantly drawn to her. At the time, I couldn't have imagined that this encounter would alter the course of my life. Over the months, our relationship grew from casual colleagues to close friends. We often stayed late at the office, brainstorming ideas or debating the finer points of storytelling. Susan had an uncanny ability to see the beauty in a flawed narrative, and her perspective challenged me to think differently. The late nights turned into dinners, and before long, we were inseparable. When I proposed to Susan a year later, it felt like the natural progression of our story. The engagement was simple yet perfect, a quiet moment shared over a picnic in the park. We dreamed about a future filled with shared adventures, promising to always prioritize each other. Little did I know that those promises would eventually be tested in ways I couldn't foresee. Marriage to Susan began as a dream. We bought a modest house and built a life full of laughter and mutual respect. Our evenings were often spent cooking together or discussing books, and our weekends were reserved for hiking or visiting friends. It was a simple yet deeply fulfilling existence, and I felt secure in our partnership. But cracks started to appear after a few years. Susan's playful nature, once endearing, sometimes came across as flirtatious, especially during social gatherings. I dismissed these moments as harmless, trusting in the foundation of our relationship. Looking back, I wonder if those early signs were warnings I chose to ignore. The turning point came when Susan joined Brockton Publishing. She threw herself into the new job with enthusiasm, and her colleagues often praised her creativity and charm. I was proud of her achievements, but I couldn't ignore the subtle changes in her behavior. The extra hours, the new acquaintances she never introduced to me, and the growing distance in our once close connection. Though I sensed something was off, I convinced myself it was just the stress of a demanding career. When I noticed Greg seated at the bar, he seemed unusually tense. He greeted me with a strained grin, his attempt at casual friendliness failing to mask the nervous energy he radiated. Despite my skepticism, I played along. I grabbed a pitcher of beer, as he suggested, and followed him to a secluded booth near the back of the room. We started with the usual small talk, lightly chatting about the Reds and their lackluster prospects for the season. Agreeing that third place was the best outcome they could aim for, we moved on to juicier local gossip. A scandal had recently come to light involving the mayor's chief of staff and a church treasurer entangled in a call girl racket. Greg chuckled, quipping about its creativity, and I joined in with a laugh. Yet, even as we joked, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was building up to something more serious. Next, the topic turned to office gossip from Brockton Publishing, where Greg worked alongside my wife, Susan. He brought up minor promotions and petty rivalries, nothing remarkable. But as he talked, I noticed his restless movements, fidgeting hands, darting eyes, and distracted replies. It was clear something was eating at him. I decided to stop dancing around it. Leaning back, I asked, "So, Greg, what's on your mind? Why'd you want to meet?" He hesitated, looking even more uncomfortable. After a few starts and stops, he finally muttered, "Look, Andy, Susan told me." His voice trailed off, leaving me confused. Clearing his throat, Greg blurted out, "Susan said I wasn't supposed to tell you. It's a secret, but I need to know you're okay with it." I stared at him, bewildered. "Okay with what?" I asked. Greg shifted uncomfortably, the tension between us unbearable. "The game, the one you and Susan play. She said it's about her being with other guys." For a moment I froze, unable to process what he was saying. Greg hurriedly continued. "She told me you're both into it, that keeping it a secret is part of the excitement. She made me promise not to say anything, but it felt wrong not to check with you." My stomach turned as his words sank in. I managed to ask, "So, you slept with Susan?" Looking miserable, Greg nodded. "Twice. Once when you were in Louisville, and again on Tuesday, when we were both off work." A mix of anger and disbelief surged through me. "And she convinced you I was okay with this? That it was some kind of game?" I asked sharply. Greg nodded again, looking ashamed. "She was convincing. She said you've been doing this for years. Andy, I swear I'm sorry." The air between us grew heavy as I absorbed his confession. After a moment, I said, "Greg, I had no idea. I thought I was married to someone I could trust." He looked devastated. "I wouldn't have gone near her if I thought you didn't know. I swear, Andy." I took a deep breath and steadied myself. "Do two things for me," I said. First, don't ever sleep with Susan again. Never, he vowed. Second, don't tell her we talked. If she tries to meet up, make an excuse. I need time to figure this out. Greg nodded, his regret written all over his face. I'm sorry, Andy. I really thought you knew. After he left, I stayed in the booth, trembling as I tried to process the bombshell he'd just dropped. Later, I called home and was relieved Susan didn't answer. I left a message saying I'd be late and that she should eat without me. I needed space to think. I wandered to a nearby diner, ordered a burger and salad, and barely touched the food. My mind raced. For 14 years, I believed I was married to a loving, faithful woman. Now everything, our life, our home, our marriage, felt like a lie. I had no idea how to face Susan or what to say. When we first met, Susan's confidence and flirtatious charm had drawn me in. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, but had an undeniable allure. Over the years, I noticed her playful interactions with others, but always trusted her completely. I never imagined she'd betray me like this. Our bed life had been ordinary, but satisfying. I thought it was enough. Apparently, I was wrong. By the time I finished my meal, I still wasn't ready to confront her. Everything felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I needed more details from Greg to make sense of it all. At home, I acted as if nothing was wrong. Susan greeted me warmly, and we chatted about our days. Later in bed, I was relieved she didn't initiate anything. I couldn't have handled it. When she fell asleep, I inched away, unable to bring myself to touch her. That night, my dreams were plagued with haunting images of Susan with faceless men, leaving me emotionally drained by morning. After Susan left for work, I called Greg again. Reluctantly, he agreed to meet for lunch. Over our meal, he filled in the gaps. Greg explained how Susan had invited him for drinks a few weeks ago. She flirted with him and eventually brought up a game you supposedly enjoyed, one where she slept with other men. Initially, Greg didn't believe her, but her persistence and the details she shared convinced him. She assured him this was something you'd both been into for years. Eventually, she invited him to a motel while you were out of town. Though hesitant, he went along, thinking it was consensual. She even suggested your house, Greg admitted, fidgeting uncomfortably. But I couldn't do that. Listening to him, I felt my anger deepen. The woman Greg described didn't sound like the wife I thought I knew. I gestured for Greg to continue. He squirmed in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. I won't go into graphic detail, Andy, he began hesitantly. But she was intense. It was obvious she enjoyed it. She talked a lot, said it excited her to share everything with you afterward. He stopped, watching my face for a reaction, but I stayed silent. How long did she say this has been happening? I asked, my jaw tight. A few years, maybe longer, Greg replied. She mentioned a few other partners before me. She called them buddies. She even said you preferred it when she found new guys because you'd lose interest if it was the same person. I nodded stiffly, gripping the table under my hands. Did she tell you how it started, or who came before you? She dropped a few names, but most didn't ring a bell, except Arnold Morrison. The city councilman? I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Yeah, Greg said, looking miserable. She said they met at some Brockton publishing event. She tried to avoid involving people you might know. And why you? I pressed further. She said I was irresistible, Greg admitted reluctantly, staring down at the table. Andy, I feel like dirt. You must hate me. I shook my head gloomily. I don't blame you, Greg. Susan fed you a convincing lie. The real problem is her. She's been lying to me for years, and she seems to enjoy it. Greg fell quiet, and I sat there, my thoughts racing as I tried to decide my next move. One thing was certain, my marriage was over. But first, I needed to confirm Greg's story. Later that evening, I called my closest friend Brian and asked to meet for dinner. I left Susan a brief message saying I'd be home late. Over dinner, I laid everything out for Brian, recounting the entire ordeal. He listened quietly, asking the occasional question to clarify, but mostly letting me speak. When I finally broke down, he handed me a napkin, his calm presence more supportive than words could ever be. When I finished, he asked, So, what are you planning to do? I took a deep breath. 2 things, I said. First, I need to verify Greg's story. I still can't wrap my head around it. And second, if it's true, Susan and I are done. There's no coming back from this. Brian nodded thoughtfully. How can I help? Keep this between us for now. Not even Emily, I said, referring to his wife. You have my word, Brian assured me. This is serious. I won't say a thing. Thanks, I said, relieved. There is one name Greg mentioned, Arnold Morrison. I need you to help me reach him. He doesn't know me, but he might talk to you. Brian raised an eyebrow. You think he'll open up to me? You're a well-respected journalist in politics, I pointed out. He'll trust you more than he would me. Brian agreed, and we spent some time planning how to approach Morrison. Before we parted, we also discussed how I should act around Susan. Stay composed, Brian advised. Don't let on until you're certain of the facts. I'll try, I said, though I wasn't sure I could pull it off. That night, I forced myself to act normal. Susan greeted me warmly, her usual cheerful self, and we chatted casually. Later in bed, she nestled close, though thankfully she didn't try to initiate anything. Once she fell asleep, I shifted carefully to avoid touching her. The physical distance was a small relief. 2 days later, Brian and I sat in Arnold Morrison's spacious office just after 10 a.m. Morrison greeted Brian warmly, engaging in polite small talk, before finally asking, "What brings you here?" Brian didn't beat around the bush. "Arnie, this is personal and completely confidential. Do you know Susan Cullen, my friend Andy's wife?" Morrison's expression barely shifted, but there was a flicker of recognition. "I believe I've met her, yes," he said cautiously. I leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison, I'm not here to cause trouble, but I know you were involved with my wife. I need the truth." Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked between Brian and me. "This is off the record?" he asked. "Completely," Brian assured him. "It won't leave this room." After a moment, Morrison exhaled. "Yes, I had an affair with Susan about 2 years ago. We met at a publishing event. She told me it was part of some arrangement you two had. She said you enjoyed hearing about her with other men. She made it clear I was never to mention it to you." "How long did it last?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "About 3 months," Morrison admitted, "from late spring through the end of summer. She said you preferred when she rotated partners because it kept things exciting for you." "Where did you meet?" I asked. "Different places," he said with a sigh. "Occasionally, empty apartments I had access to through work. Once or twice, she suggested your house when you were out of town." I fought to keep my composure. "Did she ever talk about others? Or how long she'd been doing this?" "She called me her 4th or 5th buddy," Morrison replied, his tone weary. "She said I was the best, though I imagine she told that to everyone. Mr. Cullen, I'm sorry. I thought it was consensual." I nodded. "I don't hold this against you. She lied, and you believed her. That's on her." Morrison looked relieved. "You'll keep this private?" "Absolutely," Brian said firmly. Outside, Brian put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I let out a slow breath. I knew what I'd hear, but it's hard to actually face it. This seals it, though. "Do you want to talk? Grab lunch? Hit a driving range?" Brian offered. "Thanks, but no, I need to take a walk and clear my head," I replied. "But could you and Emily come over for dinner tomorrow? I'll need help planning my next steps." "Of course," Brian said. "I'll check with Emily." As I walked to my car, I felt a deep appreciation for Brian's support. At the same time, the weight of my crumbling marriage pressed heavily on me. When I pulled into the driveway later that evening, a thought struck me. Why keep pretending? Though I wasn't ready to confront Susan yet, the idea of throwing her off balance had a certain appeal. In the kitchen, Susan greeted me cheerfully, setting dinner on the table and leaning in for a kiss. I returned her smile, grabbed a bottle of wine, and took my seat. As we ate, she chattered on about her day while I responded with the occasional nod. Eventually, my silence caught her attention. "You're awfully quiet tonight," she said, tilting her head. "Bad day?" "Yeah," I replied, my tone flat. "I've just realized you can't always trust the people you think you can." Her smile wavered. "Something happened at work?" "I'd rather not get into it," I said sharply, noting the subtle tension that crept into her expression. After dinner, I served us slices of pie, and we ate in uncomfortable silence. She made a few attempts to revive the conversation with idle chatter about the neighbors and a colleague's vacation plans, but I didn't take the bait. When dessert was done, she leaned in close, brushing her cheek against mine. "Coffee? Or maybe something a little hotter," she murmured, her tone suggestive. Normally, I would have been thrilled by her attention. Tonight, it only stoked my anger. I stood abruptly. "No, I've got paperwork to finish," I said coldly, and left for my office. I resolved to stay there until she was asleep. By 10 p.m., I found myself thinking, why am I avoiding her? I changed into my pajamas and climbed into bed without saying a word. Susan, dressed in a silky, revealing nightgown, turned off the TV and slid in beside me. "Feeling up for some love, Andy?" she whispered, her voice soft. I rolled onto my side, away from her. "Not tonight." I said tersely, switching off the bedside lamp. She didn't push further, avoiding any question that might lead to an uncomfortable truth. Instead, she lay restless beside me, her unease palpable. As for me, I stared into the darkness, my mind spinning with memories of our life together and the betrayal hiding behind it all. Sleep eluded me for hours. The next morning, I left the house early without a word to Susan. By 7:30, I was at my desk, preparing for what lay ahead. I started making lists: bank accounts, credit cards, movers. I also left a note for my boss, Lionel, requesting a private meeting. At 8:15, Lionel knocked on my door. "Andy, you wanted to see me?" "Yeah," I said, closing the door behind him. I trusted Lionel not just as my boss, but as a friend. "This is personal, and I need it to stay confidential. I've just found out Susan has been unfaithful, and I'm leaving her." Lionel looked stunned. "Good grief, Andy. I'm so sorry." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I need your help. Do you remember the headhunter who reached out to me last year? I'd like to reconnect with them." Lionel took a moment to process, but quickly nodded. "Of course. I'll get you their details." By mid-morning, I was on the phone with the headhunter who'd previously expressed interest in my skills. By lunchtime, I had sent over an updated resume, and by mid-afternoon, we were discussing 3 potential positions. The most appealing opportunity was a fundraising role at a major nonprofit in Chicago. It came with a 20% salary bump, a stronger support team, and an immediate start date since the position had been vacant for months. I expressed my interest and offered to interview as soon as possible. At 5:50, just as I was leaving for the day, my phone buzzed. "Mr. Cullen, this is Ted Ruska from Global Resources in Chicago. I understand you're interested in the fundraising director position." For the next half hour, we discussed the job's responsibilities and the organization's mission. By the end of the call, Ted invited me to an in-person interview with their board in 2 days. I accepted, feeling a small glimmer of hope amid the chaos of my personal life. That evening, I met with Brian and Emily for dinner. Sharing the story was as painful as it was cathartic. Emily, visibly upset, didn't hold back. "What a horrible woman," she muttered, her fists clenched. Then softening, she reached for my hand. "Andy, I'm so sorry. What can we do to help?" "Just be my friends," I said, brushing away tears. "I'll get through this, but knowing I have your support means everything." Over dinner, I explained my plan. "I'm aiming for a fresh start. If the Chicago job pans out, I'll pack up and leave without a word. I don't want revenge or public humiliation for Susan. I just want her to wake up one day and realize I'm gone. That'll be punishment enough." I described how I'd handle the transition, delaying public announcements about my new role, switching to a new phone number and email, and using Lionel's help to stay off Susan's radar. "When she inevitably calls you, just tell her you don't know anything," I told them. Emily nodded. "You can count on us. And when she does reach out, I'll happily tell her what I think of her." Brian grinned at her. "I take it you'll stay faithful to me." Emily rolled her eyes and smacked his arm playfully. "Obviously, and you'd better not even think about pulling something like this, unless you're ready to lose all your dignity." We all laughed, and for the first time in days, I felt a brief sense of relief. For those few hours, I almost forgot the weight of what I was dealing with. When I got home later that night, the bedroom was dark, but Susan was still awake. Earlier, she'd sent me a few lighthearted emails, which I'd barely responded to, mentioning only that I'd be home late after dinner with friends. "Hey, love," she greeted softly. Her voice was warm, and the sound of it twisted the knife in my heart. I wanted to believe, just for a moment, that she was still the woman I had fallen in love with. "How was dinner? I missed you," she said. "It was fine," I replied coolly. "I had dinner with Brian and Emily. It's nice to have people in your life you can count on." Her shoulders stiffened slightly, but she didn't press for more. She was too afraid of where the conversation might lead. I got ready for bed without another word. When I climbed in, she wrapped her arms around me. "You let me down last night," she murmured, her tone teasing. "Think you can make it up to me tonight?" I gave a dry chuckle. "Sorry, Susan," I said, rolling away. "I've still got a lot on my mind. Not tonight." She paused, clearly unsettled by my tone. "All right, honey, I understand," she said softly. "But I miss you. I hope we can be close again soon." She stroked my arm gently before rolling back to her side of the bed. It took her a long time to fall asleep, her breathing uneven as she lay awake. For me, sleep was out of reach, my thoughts churning endlessly as I planned my next steps. In the days that followed, my life accelerated at an almost dizzying pace. The interview with Global Resources Council in Chicago turned out better than I'd imagined, and they extended an offer almost immediately. Without hesitation, I accepted, agreeing to start in just 10 days. Back at work, I shared the news with Lionel, explaining the situation. Despite the short notice, he was supportive, understanding the urgency. We worked out a plan for me to stay on as a part-time consultant for a month to help with the transition. I assured him I'd do everything I could to ensure a smooth handoff, and he promised to back me in every way possible. With my future mapped out and friends like Lionel and Emily in my corner, I felt ready to begin again, leaving Susan to confront the wreckage of her own making. A few days later, I flew back to Chicago to finalize my relocation. With the help of a real estate agent recommended by Ted Ruska, I found a sleek, modern 2-bedroom apartment just a short walk from my new office. The space felt like a clean slate, a perfect symbol of the fresh start I desperately needed. I didn't hesitate. Signed the lease on the spot and moved quickly to furnish it. Afterward, I spent hours selecting furniture and decor to fill the apartment, ensuring every detail was handled. The building manager agreed to oversee deliveries, so the space would be ready before my official move-in. To cover the smaller essentials, bedding, towels, kitchenware, I enlisted my soon-to-be assistant, Eileen Stambaugh. Eileen eagerly agreed, especially when I promised to treat her to dinner at one of Chicago's best restaurants once I settled in. By the time I returned to Cincinnati, nearly everything was in place. All that remained was clearing out my university office, packing my personal items, and disentangling my finances from Susan's. Methodically, I tackled each task, wrapping up most of the logistics by Friday evening. Susan didn't ask about my frequent absences. She was used to my work-related travel. What she couldn't ignore, however, was my increasingly cold demeanor at home. She tried to compensate with exaggerated warmth and affection, but I kept my distance. I could see the doubt creeping into her expression as she tried to decipher my behavior. Yet she never confronted me directly. Maybe she was afraid I knew the truth, or was too cowardly to face it. Either way, her unease gave me a dark sense of satisfaction. One afternoon, Emily called me at work, her voice practically brimming with amusement. "Guess who just called me?" she said. "Who?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. "Your darling wife," Emily replied with a laugh. "She's fishing for answers. She wanted to know if I had any idea why you're being so distant." "What did you tell her?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Oh, I made her squirm a little," Emily said, clearly enjoying herself. "She told me how cold you've been, avoiding her, shutting her out. So I asked her if there was anything she might have done to upset you. She swore there wasn't. Then I said, 'Well, why don't you ask him directly?' And she admitted she was too scared to push you." I laughed softly. "She's terrified." "Exactly," Emily agreed. "She's trying to play innocent while secretly panicking, but don't worry, I didn't give her a thing." "Thanks, Emily. Let me know if she tries anything else." "Of course," she said. "You tell me when you're ready to drop the hammer." "Monday," I said decisively. "That's when it happens." Over the weekend, I made no effort to hide my disdain. On Saturday, Susan tentatively suggested a walk in the park, her tone unusually sweet. I responded with a blank stare before saying, "I'm not interested." Later, when she asked about dinner or a movie, I dismissed her without a second thought, claiming I'd rather stay home and relax. As we sat on the couch that evening, I waited until the show we were watching was almost over before abruptly standing up. "I've got some reports to finish," I announced, disappearing into my office without another word. That night, I went to bed long after she had fallen asleep. The next morning, I woke to find her pressed against me, her lips grazing my neck as her hand slid over my chest. "Good morning, baby," she whispered, her voice dripping with seduction. "I think we should make up for lost time." I opened my eyes to see her playful smile, but it only fueled my disgust. Gently but firmly, I placed my hands on her shoulders and pushed her back. "Susan, don't," I said, my tone sharp. "I don't force myself on you when you're not interested, and I expect the same courtesy." Her expression shifted from playful to hurt. "But it's been weeks," she said, her voice trembling. "Did I do something wrong? Are you mad at me?" It was the closest she'd come to addressing the obvious tension. Her desperation was palpable. "Why don't you tell me?" "Susan," I said coldly. "Is there something you've done that I should be upset about?" She looked down, her voice barely audible. "No," she murmured. "Nothing." "Then I guess we're done here," I said, walking into the kitchen to make coffee. The rest of the day passed in strained silence. Susan avoided me entirely, retreating to the bedroom or slipping out of the house. I overheard her making several hushed phone calls, likely seeking advice, or maybe comfort, from someone she trusted, or someone who didn't know what I did. While she was out running errands, I called Greg. "Has Susan been in touch with you?" I asked. "She has," Greg admitted. "She asked me about you. Said you've been distant, but acted like she didn't know why. I played dumb." "Good," I said. "Anything else?" "She mentioned wanting to pick up where we left off, but said she'd wait until things with you settled down. I told her that was fine." "Keep playing along," I said. "It'll all come to light soon. And remember, don't let her know we've spoken." "Don't worry," Greg promised. I hung up, satisfied that everything was in place. Monday was coming, and with it, the moment everything would change. On Monday morning, as I finished breakfast, Susan walked into the bedroom to get ready for work. She paused mid-step when she saw me dressed in sweatpants and sneakers instead of my usual work attire. "Aren't you heading to the office today?" she asked, puzzled. "No," I said flatly. "I took the day off. I have some things to handle." Her hesitation was brief before she smiled warmly. "Well, since you're not in a hurry, maybe we could spend a little time together?" she suggested, her tone coy. "I wouldn't mind being late for work." I forced myself to recall the image of her with Arnold Morrison, or any of the other men she'd betrayed me with. My stomach churned at the thought of her warmth and affection being shared so easily with others, while I had remained loyal. "No," I replied, my voice cold and detached. Without waiting for her reaction, I left the bedroom and headed down to the basement to retrieve my suitcases. I stayed there until I heard her car leave the driveway. By mid-morning, I had packed everything I intended to take, 3 suitcases and several boxes of books and personal items. I called a taxi, which waited outside the post office as I shipped the boxes to my new Chicago apartment. From there, it was straight to the airport. By 7:30 p.m., I was unpacking in my new place, arranging my belongings, and trying to make the space feel like home. Later, I walked to a nearby pizza joint, ordered a pie and a beer, and raised a toast to myself. Here's to the first day of the rest of my life, a life without Susan. Before leaving the house that morning, I had written a short, blunt note and left it on the kitchen table under my wedding ring and phone. It read, "I know all about your little game. Here's mine. Farewell to the cheating wife." The first week in my new role at Global Resources Council was demanding, which was a blessing in disguise. The busyness left me little time to dwell on the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. I missed Susan, not because I wanted to be with her anymore, but because love and anger don't simply cancel each other out. Years of love and loyalty don't vanish overnight, no matter how deeply someone hurts you. My feelings for her had turned into a tangled mess of nostalgia, pain, and fury, but at least my new job kept me focused and moving forward. By Friday evening, I was glad to collapse on the couch and unwind with a ball game. The weekend, however, loomed dauntingly. I was alone in a new city, unfamiliar with my surroundings and struck by the reality of being single, not just in status, but in every aspect of my life. The thought of rebuilding, making new friends, finding a new relationship felt exhausting and isolating. Sunday brought a welcome distraction, a phone call from Brian and Emily. They wanted to check in, offering support and encouragement. I gave them my new contact information and address, emphasizing the need for secrecy. Emily, always eager to share the latest, filled me in on her recent encounter with Susan. "She called Monday night," Emily said, clearly savoring the memory. She was hysterical, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. But eventually I made out the gist. Andy's gone. He's just gone. I laughed bitterly. "And what did you do?" "Oh, I played along," Emily said, her tone light with amusement. "I told her I'd come over right away. When I got there, she looked like a train wreck. Tears everywhere, makeup running, hair a mess. I poured her a drink and played the sympathetic friend. God, Andy, it was almost too much fun." "She told you everything?" I asked, curious. "Every detail," Emily replied, a grin audible in her voice. "She said she came home to find your wedding ring and the note. I acted completely shocked. Like, why would Andy do that? Did you leave him a note or something?" She broke down and finally admitted, "I cheated on him." I pretended to be outraged, stormed around the kitchen, glaring at her. Then I told her, "I can't believe you'd do this to Andy. He was the best husband anyone could hope for." And I left her crying into her wine glass. I chuckled. "Your performance deserves an award, thank you." "She's desperate to find you," Emily added. "And honestly, I hope it's driving her mad." The fact that I still missed Susan infuriated me further. After all I had given her, how dare she betray me and leave me to pick up the pieces? Over the next 2 weeks, Brian and Emily became my lifeline. I called them often, venting about my new job, the loneliness of starting over, and the simmering anger that refused to subside. They were unwavering in their support, constantly reminding me that things would improve. Meanwhile, Susan was relentlessly reaching out to anyone who might know where I was. Emily told me she called almost daily, her desperation mounting. Lionel mentioned that Susan had even shown up at my old office, shocked to learn that I had quit and left no forwarding address. 3 weeks into my new life, Brian and Emily invited me to spend a weekend back in Cincinnati. It was a much-needed escape, a chance to recharge and feel grounded. Over dinner, Emily shared her latest encounter with Susan. "She came to see me on Thursday," Emily said, her eyes sparkling mischievously. "She's still in full-blown panic mode. She's even talking about hiring a private investigator. She thinks if she can just find you and explain, you'll forgive her." I snorted. "As if? Did she tell you her version of the story?" "Oh, absolutely," Emily said, her grin widening. "I called her out, said, 'You've been crying about this for weeks. When are you going to tell me the whole truth?' And she finally cracked." I leaned forward, intrigued. "Well, let's hear it." That evening, I learned more about my wife than I ever wanted to know, things I could never forgive. Emily relayed Susan's first betrayal with a mix of outrage and grim satisfaction, as though she'd been waiting for the moment to share it. She described how Susan met a charming British man at a literary event. He had captivated her with his accent and sharp wit, spending the evening chatting her up, and eventually inviting her for drinks. "She told me she initially turned him down," Emily began, rolling her eyes. "She said she mentioned being married and couldn't possibly go out with him. But instead of walking away, she gave him her number and said she'd meet him at his hotel bar in an hour." I sat there, my gaze fixed on the floor, my jaw clenched. I'd always known there was a first time. I'd suspected this kind of betrayal for years. But hearing the details, picturing how it began, tore at me in a way I hadn't anticipated. Emily didn't stop. They met at the bar, had a few drinks, and ended up in his room. She admitted they slept together that night. Emily paused, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "When I asked her why she'd do such a thing, do you know what she said? She actually said I was bored. I know that's no excuse, but it's the truth. Andy and I had a great life, but everything felt predictable. Then this handsome guy with an accent came along, and I thought, why not? This will be exciting." My fists tightened, nails digging into my palms. "Bored," I muttered bitterly. The word tasted foul. "Exactly," Emily replied. She even said the Zex wasn't incredible, just exciting because it was new. She claimed it made things better with you afterward. She convinced herself it was harmless, like spicing up her own life would improve your marriage too. She thought she'd found a win-win. I exhaled sharply, trying to steady the storm of rage building inside me. "Unbelievable," I said through gritted teeth. Emily shook her head. "It gets worse. She told me how it snowballed from there. At first it was a few random one-night stands, maybe once or twice a year. But eventually she met a guy she found irresistible, and it turned into a 3-month affair. That one ended only because he got engaged to his girlfriend." My stomach churned, but Emily continued relentlessly. After that, she realized she enjoyed longer affairs. She said it was thrilling to grow comfortable with someone over time, to explore what they could do for her. She decided short-term flings, 6, 10, maybe 20 encounters, were the sweet spot, just enough to keep it exciting before it became mundane. "And the game she invented?" I asked, my voice colder than I thought possible. Emily's lips twisted in disgust. "That started when one of her flings got possessive and threatened to tell you. She panicked and came up with the idea to tell her lovers you were in on it, that you enjoyed hearing about her escapades. It was her insurance against blackmail. She was proud of it too, Andy. She laughed when she told me how clever she thought she was." Brian placed another beer in front of me, and I took a slow sip, trying to quiet the dark thoughts swirling in my mind. None of this was truly shocking, not anymore, but hearing it spelled out in such detail left me feeling hollow. How had I been so blind? How could I have trusted someone who had so thoroughly dismantled the life we built together? "She was bored," I said finally, bitterness dripping from every word. "Everyone gets bored sometimes in marriage. You don't cheat. You talk to your partner. You find ways to reignite the spark, take a trip, try something new in the bedroom. You don't destroy trust for a cheap thrill." My voice trembled with anger as I continued. Not once did she give me a chance to fix things. She decided to spice up her life, not ours. When I prepared to fly back to Chicago on Sunday, Brian asked a pointed question. So, what's next for Susan? Are you leaving her to stew in her misery? Or do you have something bigger planned? I shook my head. I'm not sure yet. Maybe both. I'll let her wonder for a while, and when she finally tracks me down, she'll get a surprise she won't forget. Brian chuckled. I'd pay to see that. To my surprise, weeks passed before Susan found me. Brian later told me she had hired someone to track me down. I wasn't surprised, only irritated it hadn't taken longer. One Thursday evening, I returned home to find a long, desperate voicemail waiting for me. Her voice was thick with sobs. Andy, I finally found you. Thank God, I'm so sorry. Please, baby, I love you more than anything. I need to explain. I'll do anything to make this right. Please call me back. You're the only man I've ever loved. The message dragged on for 5 excruciating minutes, filled with tearful pleas and empty promises. Not a single word surprised me. Not a single word diminished my anger. Did she really think an apology could erase years of deceit and betrayal? That I could forgive her because she finally felt guilty? I deleted the voicemail and poured myself a drink. There was no fixing this. Not for her, and certainly not for me. The next day, I asked Eileen, my assistant, to join me for a long lunch. Over the past few weeks, she had become more than just a coworker. She was someone I could rely on. Sharp, pragmatic, and with a biting sense of humor, Eileen had already heard most of the backstory about how I'd landed at Global Resources. When I finally laid out my plan for Susan, her reaction was immediate and spirited. Oh, Andy, this is genius, she said, practically cackling. I'm all for it. That woman deserves every bit of it. Thanks, I said, feeling a rare sense of validation. But I'm going to need help finding the right person. Eileen smirked, leaning back in her chair. Leave it to me. I've got a couple of people in mind. Give me a couple of days. I raised a skeptical eyebrow. You're serious? Dead serious, she replied with a wink. It's not exactly in my job description, but for you, I'll make an exception. Her confidence was infectious, and for the first time in weeks, I felt an almost wicked sense of anticipation. My plan was falling into place. Meanwhile, Susan's calls continued like clockwork. Every couple of days, her voice filled with desperation. Her messages were shorter now, but the content never changed. Apologies, declarations of love, and pleas for another chance. They grated on my nerves, each one a reminder of the trust she'd destroyed. Not once did her words make me reconsider. By Monday evening, as I was finishing up at work, Eileen appeared in my doorway, a sly smile playing on her lips. It's handled, she announced. I've found someone perfect. Just tell me when and where, and I'll take care of the rest. I tilted my head, still uncertain. Perfect, huh? Who is she? And how exactly did you talk her into this? It's unconventional. Eileen shrugged, her grin widening. Don't worry about that. She's excited, actually. I told her your story, and she practically volunteered. Trust me, Andy. You're going to love this. And you're really not going to tell me who it is? I asked, still hesitant. Nope, she said cheerfully. But I promise you'll thank me later. The next morning, I called Susan and left a voicemail. It's me. If you're serious about explaining yourself, here's your chance. Be at my apartment in Chicago this Saturday at 1 p.m. Don't show up early and don't be late. You'll have 1 hour. Here's the address. Leave a message to confirm you're coming. As expected, she called back within minutes. I let it go to voicemail, then listened. Her voice was thick with relief, nearly trembling. Andy, thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be there, I promise. I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'm so sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Her message dragged on, filled with predictable phrases I'd already heard 100 times. It only reinforced my decision. On Wednesday, I stopped by Eileen's desk. Saturday at 1 o'clock, I said. Can your mystery person be there by noon? Absolutely, she replied. Then, with a mischievous glint in her eye, she added, but you owe me a call afterward. I want every juicy detail. Consider it my reward. Later that evening, Emily called to check in. Her voice was a mix of disbelief and contempt. Andy, I just can't get over this, she said. Susan genuinely believes she can cry and apologize her way back into your life. It's like she doesn't even grasp the depth of what she's done. I sighed. Trust me, I know. I've spent years convincing myself she was someone she's not. People like us, people who value loyalty, assume everyone operates that way. But Susan? She never did. On Saturday morning, I spent hours cleaning my apartment. I wanted it to reflect strength, not heartbreak. By the time I was done, the place looked immaculate. Books were perfectly arranged, surfaces gleamed, and I'd even picked up a bouquet of fresh flowers for the dining table. Everything was set. At 12:05, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and to my complete surprise, Christina Hansen stood there. She worked with me at Global Resources, and she looked as stunning as ever. Petite and elegant, with piercing green eyes and jet black hair, Christina carried herself with effortless grace. I hadn't expected this. "Hello, Andy," she said, her tone warm and amused. "Surprise." I blinked, momentarily speechless. Christina was one of the most beautiful women I'd ever met, and while I'd always admired her, I'd never imagined she'd be part of this plan. "Christina, Eileen told you about today?" I finally managed. She smiled, stepping inside and holding up a small shopping bag. "She did, and I'm all in. Don't worry, I know exactly what I'm doing." Still processing her presence, I asked, "Are you sure about this? It's not a small thing." Christina stepped closer, her hand brushing my arm lightly. "Andy, I understand more than you think. Eileen told me about your wife and everything she put you through. Let's just say I've been where you are. My ex-fiancé cheated on me, and I would have done anything to put him in his place. Helping you? This feels right." I softened, my skepticism melting. "I'm really sorry you went through that." She shrugged, her smile tinged with sadness. "It's in the past. But trust me, this is going to be worth it. So, how do you want to play this?" Before getting started, we decided to have lunch. Sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, we shared sandwiches and easy conversation. Christina wasn't just breathtakingly beautiful. She was sharp, funny, and refreshingly genuine. Her laughter was infectious, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I found myself smiling without reservation. The dark cloud of anger and betrayal that had loomed over me seemed to dissipate, if only for a little while. I caught myself wondering if, under different circumstances, I'd ever have the courage to ask her out. But now wasn't the time for that. As the clock crept toward 12:45, I glanced at my watch and took a deep breath. "Christina, it's almost time. If you're sure you're ready, you should probably head to the bedroom." She rose gracefully from her chair, her expression unwavering. "I've got this," she said with quiet confidence. Before she left, she surprised me by leaning in and brushing a light kiss on my cheek. "This is going to sting, Andy," she said softly. "She's been a big part of your life. No matter how angry you are, don't expect it to feel easy. But I'll handle my part. You can count on me." Her calm composure stunned me. I stood there for a moment, watching as she disappeared into the bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. The sense of purpose she carried, combined with her poise, only deepened my admiration for her. For the first time, I felt a flicker of triumph. The doorbell rang at exactly 12:58. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked toward it, bracing myself for what was to come. When I opened the door, there stood Susan. She was trying her best to look composed, but the nervous tension was evident. She wore a dress I used to love, her makeup carefully applied, and her hair styled just the way I'd always complimented. "Hi, Andy," she said softly, her voice hesitant. For a moment, it looked like she wanted to hug me, but I stepped back, gesturing for her to come inside. "Hi, Susan," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Can I get you something to drink?" Without waiting for her answer, I headed to the kitchen and poured 2 sodas. My hands steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. By the time I returned to the table, I had forced my expression into one of calm detachment. We sat across from each other, the silence thick. Susan leaned forward, reaching for my hands, but I kept mine firmly on my lap. "All right, Susan," I began, my voice steady but cold. "You said you wanted to explain yourself. I'm giving you this chance, but let's get one thing straight. I don't think you deserve it." Her face crumpled slightly, and she took a deep breath before speaking. "Andy, I'm so sorry. I was selfish, blind, and stupid. I never meant to hurt you, but—" "Stop," I said sharply, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear about how sorry you are or how much you supposedly love me. Don't insult me with cliches. Let's deal with the facts. You cheated, not once, not twice, for years, with countless men. Isn't that right?" She looked down, her hands trembling. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "Do you remember our wedding vows?" I asked, my voice low but venomous. "Do you remember swearing to forsake all others?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And when exactly did that vow become meaningless to you? When did you decide it was okay to betray me? I leaned forward, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. How many men, Susan? How many affairs? She looked up, her face pale. I don't know. I pressed harder. 10? 20? 50? Give me a number. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Maybe 20. I sat back, letting the weight of the number hang in the air. And how many times did you sleep with them? I asked, my tone relentless. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know, she murmured. Think, I snapped. Do the math. Take your time. She hesitated before whispering, maybe 200 times? I felt the words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my composure. 200 times, I repeated coldly. How many of those were in our house, in our bed? Her head dropped, and she barely managed to speak. I guess, maybe 30. The silence that followed was deafening. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to remain calm. So, I said after a long pause, my voice like ice, why should I waste even another second being in the same room with you? Tears streamed down her face as she began pleading. Because I love you, Andy. You're the only man I've ever truly loved. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I never stopped loving you. Her words blurred together as she sobbed, pouring out a litany of apologies and promises. I tuned her out, my thoughts drifting to the years I'd wasted, the trust I'd misplaced, and the life I'd thought we were building. The sadness and rage intertwined, forming a weight I could hardly bear. At 2:05, I glanced at the clock and took a deep breath. We're done, Susan, I said firmly. There's nothing left to say. But, Andy, please, she began. Before she could finish, a soft voice came from behind us. Baby, Christina purred from the doorway. You said you'd be done by now. When are you coming back to bed? Susan whipped around, her face frozen in shock. Christina leaned casually against the doorframe, her hair tousled and lips slightly smudged, wearing a sheer pale blue robe that left little to the imagination. Her presence exuded confidence, elegance, and an unmistakable air of victory. For the first time all day, I allowed myself a genuine smile. Christina stood in the doorway of my bedroom, effortlessly radiant. Her calm confidence was almost otherworldly. I turned to Susan, who sat motionless in her chair, her face drained of color and her hands trembling. The strength she had tried to project when she walked in was gone, replaced by a broken, hollow shell of herself. Her lips quivered as she whispered, No, 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 over and over, like a mantra. I rose slowly, my voice cutting through the silence. Christina's right, Susan, your hour is up. As you can see, I have other priorities, and I'll be returning to them shortly. Susan staggered to her feet, her movements awkward and unsteady. Andy, she started, her voice cracking as her eyes darted back and forth between Christina and me. She looked utterly lost. I didn't know that you... Her sobs filled the air as she stood frozen, tears streaming, mouth opening as if to speak, but remaining silent. Without another glance, she turned, stepped into the hallway, and vanished into the cold reality she had created. I closed the door and turned to Christina, adrenaline still coursing through me. Christina, I said softly, my voice catching, you're absolutely stunning. She smiled, her eyes glistening with restrained emotion. Thank you, Andy. I guess this, she gestured to her elegant negligee, did its job. You didn't just shake her up, I said, voice thick with emotion. You completely unraveled her. Her smile was bittersweet. It was cathartic for me, too. In some way, it felt like closure for what my ex, Harris, did to me. That betrayal still stings. I'm sorry you went through that, I said sincerely. And I can't stop staring at you. She laughed lightly, stepping closer. Actually, she teased, tugging at her negligee, this thing can be tricky to get off. Could you help? Wrapping her arms around my neck, she added, Andy, this feels right. For both of us. Her kiss was tender and full of promise. Making love to Christina was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Deliberate, unhurried, and deeply connected. When we finally lay side by side, her head on my chest, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. As she stirred, she whispered she needed to leave. Slipping out of bed, she dressed gracefully. When I moved to get up, she placed a hand on my chest. Rest, she said softly, disappearing into the bathroom. When she returned, fully dressed, she kissed me gently. I didn't plan this, she admitted. But after hearing your conversation with her, I knew it was the right thing. Struggling for words, I finally said, Christina, thank you. What you've done for me is the kindest, most selfless thing anyone has ever done." She smiled warmly. "It wasn't just for you. It was for me too. And you've given me more than you realize." After one last kiss, she left, urging me to rest. I lay awake, replaying the day's events, the confrontation with Susan and the unexpected closeness with Christina. Exhausted, I eventually fell asleep. When I woke, the apartment was quiet and I wandered aimlessly, trying to make sense of everything. Later, I called Christina. My heart raced as I said, "I just wanted to thank you again. You were incredible and I can't stop thinking about you." Her laugh was warm. "It wasn't strange for me, Andy. It felt right." "It was special for me too," I said. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" After a pause, she answered, "I'd love to. And if it's okay, I'd like to stay the night again." 3 weeks later, Brian and Emily visited me in Chicago. We spent the day exploring the city, ending with drinks at a hotel bar. As I recounted my final encounter with Susan, they laughed uproariously. The mood brightened further when Christina arrived, her striking green eyes lighting up the room. Introducing her, I said proudly, "Brian, Emily, this is Christina Hansen." They hit it off instantly. At one point, Brian exclaimed, "Andy, you've hit the jackpot." Later, as we walked to dinner, Brian pulled me aside. "So is it serious?" he asked. Smiling, I replied, "We're figuring it out, but yeah, it feels serious. She's amazing." He clapped my shoulder. "Good for you, Andy. Looks like life's turning around." Following behind the women, their laughter in the evening air, I felt joy I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I believed life was giving me a second chance. Years later, on a calm Chicago morning, I sat by the window with a mug of coffee, gazing at the bustling city below. The echoes of the past, once so sharp and consuming, had softened over time. What had once felt like unbearable pain now seemed like a lesson, a painful, necessary step toward the life I was meant to live. Christina's laughter carried from the other room, grounding me in the present. She wasn't just a new chapter, she was the proof that love, when honest and mutual, could heal wounds I thought would never close. With her, there were no games, no secrets, just a steady, unspoken trust that made everything feel lighter. I thought about the man I'd been back then, clinging to an illusion of love with Susan, blind to the cracks in the foundation. Losing her had shattered me, but in that wreckage, I'd rebuilt myself piece by piece. What I thought was the end of my story was merely a turning point. Looking out at the city skyline, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the lessons, the struggle, and most of all, for the second chance I'd given myself. The life I had now wasn't just better, it was mine. Christina appeared in the doorway, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Lost in thought again?" she teased, her smile warm and familiar. "Just thinking about how far I've come," I replied. "Well," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "I'm glad it brought you here." "So am I said softly, setting down my coffee. For the first time, I wasn't just moving on, I was truly living.
A man shows compassion by inviting a beggar with a baby to stay at his home for the night. When he wakes up, he finds his house ransacked and the beggar and baby are gone. As he investigates, he uncovers a shocking truth about their identities and intentions. Hello, my friends. This is a Narrative Stories channel. Let's start this story. In a grand mansion perched on the hilltop of a bustling city, lived a wealthy businessman named Charles Montgomery. Charles was a man of influence and power, his wealth accumulated through years of dedication and shrewd business dealings. Yet, despite all his riches, he found himself powerless in the face of a heart-wrenching crisis. His beloved daughter, Emily, was gravely ill. Emily was a bright and cheerful child, her laughter once echoing through the vast halls of the mansion. But now she lay in bed, frail and weakened by a mysterious illness that had stumped the best doctors money could buy. Modern medicine had failed her, and her condition worsened with each passing day. Desperate for a miracle, Charles turned to an unconventional solution, hiring a poor nurse known for her traditional healing methods. Lena Martin was a humble woman from the outskirts of the city. Her reputation as a healer was well known among the local communities. where she had treated numerous ailments using remedies passed down through generations of her family. Though she lacked formal medical training, her skills and intuitive understanding of natural medicine were unmatched. When Charles approached her with an offer to care for his daughter, Lena felt a profound sense of duty and accepted the challenge. As Lena entered the grand mansion, she couldn't help but feel a pang of apprehension. The opulence and grandeur were a stark contrast to her modest home. She was greeted by Charles, a tall man with a stern face, softened only by the worry lines etched deeply around his eyes. He led her to Emily's room, where she found the child lying listlessly on a lavish bed, surrounded by the sterile tools of modern medicine. Charles explained Emily's condition and the various treatments she had undergone. The doctors had diagnosed her with a rare and incurable disease, leaving them with no hope of recovery. Lena listened attentively, her heart aching for the innocent child who had endured so much. "I've tried everything, Miss Martin," Charles said, his voice tinged with desperation. "If there's anything you can do, anything at all, please help her." Lena nodded, her resolve strengthening. She knew that her methods were unconventional and that many would view her as a charlatan. But she also knew the power of her ancestors' remedies. She asked for some privacy to examine Emily, and Charles reluctantly agreed. As Lena gently touched Emily's forehead, she felt an overwhelming surge of compassion. The child's pulse was weak, and her breathing labored. Lena began by brewing a concoction of herbs known for their healing properties, whispering ancient incantations as she worked. She applied poultices to Emily's chest and massaged her limbs with aromatic oils, hoping to stimulate her body's natural healing processes. Days turned into weeks, and Lena's presence in the Montgomery household became a source of hope and contention. The family physician, Dr. Harold Bennett, was skeptical of Lena's methods and frequently clashed with her. He viewed her traditional remedies as mere superstition and feared that they might interfere with the treatments he had prescribed. "Mr. Montgomery, I must insist that we continue with the prescribed medications," Dr. Bennett argued one evening. This folklore medicine could be dangerous. Charles was torn between his trust in modern science and the glimmer of hope Lena had brought into his life. He had witnessed a slight improvement in Emily's condition, but he couldn't ignore Dr. Bennett's warnings. "Dr. Bennett, I understand your concerns," Charles said, his voice measured. "But Lena's methods are the only thing that seems to be helping Emily. I can't turn my back on that." Despite the tension, Lena remained steadfast in her mission. She spent countless hours by Emily's side, singing soothing lullabies and telling stories of her ancestors' healing journeys. Slowly but surely, Emily's strength began to return. Her cheeks regained a hint of color, and her eyes sparkled with a faint glimmer of life. One evening, as Lena prepared another herbal infusion, Emily spoke for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, Lena," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lena's heart swelled with emotion. "You're welcome, sweetie. You're a brave girl, and we're going to make you better." As word of Emily's improvement spread, the household staff began to view Lena with a mix of curiosity and admiration. Even Charles, who had been initially skeptical, found himself drawn to Lena's unwavering dedication. He spent more time observing her methods, learning about the plants and rituals she used. One day, Charles approached Lena as she tended to Emily's garden of medicinal herbs, which she had convinced him to plant on the estate grounds. "Lena, I must admit, I was doubtful at first," Charles said, his voice filled with gratitude. "But seeing Emily's progress, I can't thank you enough. Your methods, they work." Lena smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. My ancestors believed in the healing power of nature and the body's ability to heal itself. I'm just continuing their legacy." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Bennett, who had heard about Emily's remarkable recovery. He was visibly agitated, his skepticism boiling over. "Mr. Montgomery, this is highly irregular," Dr. Bennett exclaimed. "You cannot rely on unproven remedies. We must resume the prescribed treatments immediately." Charles faced a difficult decision. On one hand, he respected Dr. Bennett's expertise and the advancements of modern medicine. On the other, he couldn't ignore the tangible results of Lena's care. "Dr. Bennett, I appreciate your concern," Charles said, choosing his words carefully. "But I can't deny that Lena's methods have helped Emily. Perhaps there's a way for both approaches to coexist." Reluctantly, Dr. Bennett agreed to monitor Emily's progress while allowing Lena to continue her treatments. It was an uneasy truce, but it marked the beginning of a delicate balance between modern medicine and traditional healing. As months passed, Emily's health continued to improve. She regained her strength, and her laughter once again filled the mansion. Charles, who had once been a man driven solely by wealth and success, found himself transformed by the experience. He began to see the value in the old ways, recognizing that true healing often required a holistic approach. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Emily stood up from her chair, her eyes shining with joy. "Daddy, I feel so much better now," she said, her voice full of life. "Lena's remedies and Dr. Bennett's care have made me well again." Charles felt a lump in his throat as he looked at his daughter. "Emily, I'm so proud of you, and I'm grateful to both Lena and Dr. Bennett for their dedication." Lena, who had become a cherished member of the household, smiled warmly. "Emily, you have a strong spirit. Your recovery is a testament to the power of love and faith." Dr. Bennett, though initially resistant, had come to respect Lena's knowledge and compassion. He extended a hand to her. "Lena, I must admit, I was wrong to dismiss your methods. Your dedication has taught me a valuable lesson." Lena accepted his hand with a nod. "Thank you, Dr. Bennett. There is much we can learn from each other." In the years that followed, the Montgomery household became a symbol of unity between modern medicine and traditional healing. Charles established a foundation to support the integration of holistic approaches in healthcare, ensuring that Lena's legacy would continue to inspire future generations. Emily grew up healthy and strong, carrying with her the wisdom of both worlds. She pursued a career in medicine, blending her father's scientific knowledge with Lena's traditional remedies. Her story became a beacon of hope for those who believed in the power of combining ancient wisdom with modern advancements. And as the sun set over the grand mansion on the hill, Lena's spirit lived on, a reminder that sometimes true healing required more than just medicine. It required the touch of a healer's heart and the belief in miracles. Thank you for being a part of Narrative Stories. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We are committed to bringing you the best in storytelling. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
Imagine, just picture this scenario. A wealthy but inadequate son barges into your home, your fortress, insisting he's taking your wife for a few nights. How would you react? And to top it off, he starts openly threatening you. My initial impulse was to tackle him and deliver a few punches to his arrogant face, but I opted for a different approach. As I wrapped up loading my tools into my pickup truck that Thursday afternoon, my mood wasn't the best. The client I'd been dealing with for the past fortnight seemed unable to make up his mind about the staircase project, constantly requesting alterations to the original plan. The latest change demanded this morning was so extensive that it necessitated dismantling a significant portion of the work already done. Furthermore, consulting with the architect and engineer was imperative, as accommodating the client's latest whim meant redrawing the structural plans. Consequently, the following day unexpectedly turned into an off day. I'm Kenneth Morrison, the lead artisan and proprietor of a small woodworking carpentry shop specializing in crafting top-tier staircases. My clientele comprises affluent mansion owners, hotels, restaurants, and offices willing to shell out well over $50,000 for a bespoke artistic staircase. At 34, I'd been married to Daphne Tupper, 29, for 4 years. Daphne, a successful lawyer at Kramer, Boylan & Hendricks, a law firm specializing in commercial and intellectual property law. We hadn't yet started a family, primarily because Daphne wanted to establish her career first. Arriving home at 4:30 p.m., I was taken aback to find my wife's car in the driveway. Typically, she worked late on Thursdays to have a shorter day on Fridays. Entering through the back door, my usual path after a day at a construction site, I noticed a slight water pressure problem. It was unusual to find Daphne in the upstairs shower at this time, as she typically showered either in the morning or before bed. After swiftly changing into more comfortable clothes, I made my way upstairs to investigate why my wife was home so early on a Thursday afternoon. As I suspected, Daphne had recently finished showering and was now putting on some enticing black fishnet stockings. A brand new black dress lay on the bed, patiently awaiting its turn to be worn. "Hey, honey, why are you home so early? Did I forget something? Do we have plans tonight that slipped my mind?" I asked. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, a hint of nervousness apparent, though she tried to conceal it. Letting out a sigh, she replied, "No, Kenneth, you haven't forgotten anything. I'm going out tonight and you're not. I'll be away until Sunday afternoon spending the weekend with Derek Kramer." "What? What are you talking about? Is it a business trip or something?" I inquired. "No, Kenneth, it's not a business trip. Derek has a hotel suite reserved for him and me. I'll be back next week, but this weekend is for him," she said, her tone defiant though her words seemed rehearsed. "No, you can't. I don't want my wife spending a weekend with another man. What is this nonsense?" I protested. "Well, you better accept it, Kenneth, because that's what Derek wants, and I advise you not to cross him," she chuckled. "So you're willingly going along with this scheme. You expect me to just accept it, suppress my feelings, and let you go, and then you'll return as my faithful wife after this weekend?" I retorted, my words dripping with sarcasm. "I never said it's just for this weekend. Derek mentioned he wants it to happen occasionally. So, yes, deal with it and keep quiet. Trust me, your life will be much simpler if you go along with it," she stated firmly. "We'll see about that. I won't tolerate this, Daphne. You better think about what you're doing because I won't let that arrogant guy control my life. If you think I'm a pawn you can manipulate without objection, you're in for a rude awakening," I warned. By then, she had finished getting ready for the evening. I went downstairs, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and noticed a Mercedes parking in front of the house. Mr. Smug himself emerged, walked up to the front door, and rang the bell. "Kenneth, that's Derek. Will you go answer the door?" she yelled from upstairs. I quickly punched in a code on the back door alarm panel, set up my cell phone for video recording, and put it in my t-shirt pocket to capture everything. Then I waited in the living room. I'd known Derek Kramer since Daphne started working for CBH 3 years ago. Our first meeting was at their office Christmas party. Derek, a man in his 40s, radiated a dominant aura. He seemed friendly with his partners and flirtatious with female employees and wives of male employees. However, around his male employees and the husbands of female employees, he was arrogant and disdainful. I took an instant dislike to the guy. Daphne descended the stairs with visible anger and opened the door while I observed from the living room, sipping my beer. She apologized for the delay, expressing uncertainty about her husband's manners, and then whispered something to Derek, though I couldn't discern her words. Derek, upon entering the living room, confronted me about an apparent issue with Daphne spending the weekend with him. His demeanor resembled that of a school principal addressing a disobedient child. Surprised by his audacity to assume authority in my own home, I firmly warned him to leave, my fists clenched. He laughed loudly with Daphne smirking beside him. He dismissed the idea of involving the police, confident they wouldn't intervene. Upon noticing my cell phone recording, he snatched it, attempting to stop the footage. Failing due to the password lock, he angrily threw it onto the ceramic floor, which predictably won the confrontation. He asserted his dominance, declaring that Daphne would spend the weekend with him regardless of my feelings, emphasizing that my opinion was inconsequential. Any attempt to intervene would result in dire consequences, including the exposure of alleged criminal activities. He warned against upsetting Daphne or taking any action that could jeopardize his plans. I decided to act oblivious. It's highly unlikely that such information would become public knowledge. I've never been involved in money laundering or had any association with illegal materials involving children, I replied mechanically. That can be easily arranged. uploading material to your computer is a simple task. I possess content that could quickly tarnish your reputation. I chose to feign even more ignorance. Illegal materials involving children are, well, illegal. If you upload something like that to my computer, wouldn't that mean you're already in possession of illegal material? I asked innocently. That's the difference between you and me. Some things that are illegal for you are perfectly acceptable for individuals of power like myself who have the right connections. I highly suggest you stick to your working-class antics and refrain from bothering people of higher standing. Do you understand? I could hardly believe what I had just heard. Such dialogue would be excessive, even in a comedy movie. Yet the person in my living room was speaking earnestly. Oh, and one more thing. Please refrain from seeking revenge against me or Daphne. That includes attempting to retaliate by engaging with someone else closely. I want to avoid any potential transmission of infections from you to Daphne and then to me. All right, I won't ask Daphne to withhold lovemaking from you. At least not for now. Can't you see I'm not being unreasonable? Basically, if you cross any boundaries, I'll be aware of it. Okay? Now let's go, honey. They returned to the front door. Daphne grabbed her overnight bag and left without saying goodbye or acknowledging my presence. Honey. He referred to my wife as honey. The entire situation was so surreal that I couldn't summon pure anger. My emotions were a mix of anger and astonishment. At that moment, I silently thanked the burglar who had broken into my house the year before I met Daphne. I was so disturbed that I had a comprehensive surveillance and alarm system installed, complete with motion-activated cameras and voice-activated microphones that could record everything in the house and store it in the cloud. I never let on to Daphne that the system could be set to recording mode while we were at home, ensuring she remained unaware when I activated it just before she opened the front door for that despicable individual. Simultaneously, I had initiated the recording on my cell phone, serving more as a decoy. My hope was that Kramer would notice it and figure out a way to turn it off. This would make him feel less guarded, and he might speak more freely. Thinking he was no longer being filmed, I hoped this could be a valuable source of information for a potential divorce. The scoundrel gave me much more than I expected. The cell phone now scattered on the floor was actually my business cell phone. After dealing with a wealthier clientele, I quickly realized that providing them with my main cell phone meant being on call almost 24/7. A dedicated business cell phone allowed me to turn it off at the end of the day, and I could attend to messages the following morning. So at least I wasn't without a means of communication. I picked up my personal phone and called my business lawyer and best friend Harry. 10 years ago, Harry Davenport became the husband of my elder sister, Jennifer. They enjoyed a blissful marriage until tragedy struck. 4 years into their union, Jennifer tragically drowned during a trip to Guadalupe with her 3 friends. Despite the heartbreaking loss, Harry remained an integral part of our family, earning our love and respect. 3 years after Jennifer's passing, Harry found love again in Christine. They tied the knot after a year of dating, and my parents, Daphne and I, were honored guests at their wedding. To this day, Harry and Christine remain like family to me. Recently, I found myself in a desperate situation and urgently sought Harry's help. After explaining the threats made by someone named Kramer and recounting the events of my wife's private weekend getaway, Harry immediately offered his support. He advised me to stay indoors, avoid contacting anyone, and switch off all communication devices, assuring me that he and Christine would arrive in an hour with dinner. Harry's advice provided much-needed reassurance. Reflecting on the past hour's events, I realized that Daphne, my wife, had been captivated by Kramer's power and charm. I never imagined she would forsake our love for him. It was a harsh realization that our bond wasn't as strong as I thought. My journey with Daphne began 5 years ago at a friend of a friend's birthday party. Despite being unfamiliar with most of the attendees, I struck up a conversation with Daphne, the sister of the birthday boy's army buddy stationed in Afghanistan. Our connection flourished, leading to a week of dating and eventual marriage the following year. During that time, I remained employed by Mr. Duncan, the founder of the small company where I worked. Craig Duncan was highly skilled in woodworking and well-known locally. Despite his expertise in woodworking, his skills in accounting and management were lacking. While still in college, he had hired me as a part-time accountant to handle his bookkeeping. A few months into my role, Mr. Duncan secured 3 substantial contracts that demanded more time than he could spare. Although these projects were challenging, his clients insisted he take them on. Consequently, he asked for my assistance in the field. Initially, my tasks involved running errands, acquiring supplies, and providing support. With handling larger pieces, my rapid learning and aptitude for the work became evident, and after overcoming the initial learning curve, I could independently handle simpler tasks or be a valuable asset on more complex projects. While pursuing my accounting degree, my passion for hands-on work led me to pursue an apprenticeship. After a few years, I earned certification and became Mr. Duncan's associate. Upon his retirement, my parents supported me financially, enabling me to buy out his share over a 2-year period. Despite being viewed as an uneducated shop worker by the lawyers at CBH, my company flourished, focusing on fewer but more lucrative projects. Over the preceding months, I had hired 2 assistants, and my net income and values surpassed those of many lawyers associated with my wife. Despite this success, even my wife was unaware of these details. My contemplation was interrupted by Christine and Harry, who arrived with Chinese takeout and beer. "Are you okay, Kenneth?" Christine asked, offering a warm hug. "I can't believe Daphne did that to you. This is so unlike her," Harry reassured, giving me a supportive hug. "Don't worry, buddy. We'll sort things out. Let's have dinner, and then I'll take a look at your recording." I shared the details of Daphne's unwelcoming reception when I arrived home earlier that afternoon. After dinner, I grabbed my laptop and retrieved the files containing recordings from both the camera and microphone. Fortunately, the conversations were exceptionally clear. "I can't believe what I just heard," Harry exclaimed. "Quite the arrogant guy," I remarked. "No, more like downright foolish," Harry replied. "I mean, this guy is what, 40, 42 years old? That means he has about 15 years of law practice under his belt. He's not a newbie. He's so full of himself that it never occurs to him that sometimes you just need to keep quiet. Your clever trick of making him think he wasn't being recorded after he destroyed your cell phone worked like a charm. He took the bait and spilled everything we need to know." "Okay, but can I legally use it since it was recorded without his consent?" I inquired. "Absolutely. This is your home. You have the right to record whatever you want here," Harry reassured me. "So I have nothing to worry about? Is that what you're saying?" I questioned. "No, that's not what I'm saying. We need to be extremely cautious. I did some research on my way here. Chris was kind enough to drive and handle the takeout. It turns out our guy Kramer is the son of the founder of their law firm. You were aware of this, right?" Harry explained, and I nodded. "What you might not know is that his father, Marvin Kramer, had quite a reputation. He wasn't a great lawyer, but most of the judges in the area were his former college buddies. Knowing everyone personally made it easy for him to win most of his cases. Unfortunately, his son Derek has followed in his footsteps. That's what makes him dangerous. He has a wide network of friendly judges, and if he files a case, getting a judgment in our favor will be extremely challenging, no matter how illegal his actions are." "Wow, so you're saying that no matter what I do, I'm in trouble?" "Not necessarily. Winning will be challenging, but not impossible. I have connections too, you know. The key is to gather enough evidence to make a strong case against him. I've got a plan. But you mentioned that the judges will always side with him," I inquired. "Unless we take the case to criminal court, that's what we'll aim for." Our conversation was interrupted by a knock on the front door. A petite brunette was waiting on the porch. "Hello, Mr. Morrison?" she asked. "Hi, Laura, come on in," Harry called out behind me. "Kenneth, meet Laura Foster. She's the computer specialist at the private investigator firm we collaborate with. I took the liberty of reaching out to her after our earlier call tonight." We briefed Laura on the situation and had her review the recorded conversation, particularly the part where Kramer threatened to upload incriminating material to my computer. Laura paid close attention and then outlined the plan. "All right, there are 2 possible scenarios. Either they come here during the day, likely with your wife's assistance, sit at your computer, change the date, and upload their content, making it appear as if it was done before Kramer's visit. If that happens, your camera system will capture everything. Just ensure it's in record mode before you leave for work in the morning. She pulled a small gray box from her bag. The other option is remote access to your computer for their mischief. I'll install this module upstream of your modem to record anyone attempting to access your router and monitor what they try to upload or download. Take a few minutes to transfer all your personal or sensitive data and files onto a flash drive, then delete everything on your computer. The goal is to prevent them from accessing it. I'll assist with this just to ensure you don't unintentionally leave any hidden data on the computer, Laura explained confidently. It was evident that she was well-versed in her field. Let's begin, Kenneth. Currently, your only evidence against him for blackmail is a recording. If you attempt legal action with just that, your case might be dismissed swiftly. Public opinion doesn't view blackmail as a very serious crime, and the judges he knows may support him. The ideal scenario would be if Kramer actually uploaded illegal material to your computer and then reported it to the police, alleging he has evidence of you possessing illegal content. In that case, we would have a trail indicating that all of this occurred without your presence at the computer. With the advance warning you received from Kramer, which you recorded, we would have enough evidence to build a robust case against him in criminal court. His judge friends would be less inclined to support him if he's involved in criminal activities, especially those related to illegal materials with children, and they would distance themselves from him. I find that disturbing and twisted, I remarked. Yes, but Kramer is just as twisted. One more thing. Can you refrain from using your computer for the next few days? If Kramer proceeds with his plan and reports you, the police inspectors may want to check the computer records to confirm if anyone accessed the illegal files. Post-upload. If you avoid using it, the records will remain clean, which would be more advantageous for us. Also ensure that your cell phone doesn't connect to your home Wi-Fi in the coming days. To prevent them from using your phone instead of your computer, Laura installed the surveillance module and erased all sensitive information, including my company paperwork from both my computer and cell phone. The module will forward us copies of all access requests. I'll reach out to Harry and you once we have some information. Best of luck, guys, Laura informed us before leaving. All right, let's get back to more practical matters, Harry suggested. Kenneth, do you want to start the divorce process now, or do you prefer waiting until Daphne returns to see if things can be resolved? No, I want a divorce as soon as possible. I can't stay married to someone easily influenced and corrupted by self-proclaimed powerful men. No hesitation. I want out. All right then, I'll contact Claudia Milton tomorrow. She's the family law expert at my office. Good, fair, and efficient. I'll ask her to reach out to you ASAP. You'll like her, Harry assured me. We continued discussing matters, and I provided Harry with the access code to my recording system for real-time updates and cloud-stored information. Christine and Harry departed around 11 p.m. I took a Zappa clone and fell asleep within half an hour. At 8:30 the following day, Claudia Milton called me after concluding a conversation with Harry, who had detailed the specifics of my situation. She requested my presence in her office by 11 a.m. During our meeting, Claudia expressed sympathy for my predicament upon learning about Derek Kramer's questionable reputation. She reassured me that since I had purchased the house before meeting Daphne and her name wasn't on the deed, the property remained mine. With no children in the picture, the divorce proceedings would be straightforward. Concerned about my company, I inquired about the possibility of being forced to sell it and divide the proceeds. Claudia summoned Harry to address my concerns, and he promptly assured us, "Don't worry. The marriage contract clearly stipulates that your company is solely yours and she has no claim to it. They might attempt, but I double-checked and legally they have no grounds." I concluded the meeting with Claudia at 12:30, handling financial matters as instructed. She took charge of the situation, assuring me that everything was under control and Daphne would be served the divorce papers at her office on Monday. Later, I replaced my damaged cell phone and spent the remainder of the weekend tending to the yard and catching up on my favorite TV series. Despite my ongoing anger towards Daphne, I struggled to fully comprehend the reality of the situation. While I anticipated mourning the marriage eventually, at that moment, my emotions were still too raw. The thought of Daphne returning home on Sunday loomed, and I debated whether to sleep in the guest room or assign it to her. Ultimately, I decided that it was my house, and she had walked out on me. Refusing to share my bed with her, I relocated all her belongings to the guest room. Subsequently, I purchased a new lockable doorknob and installed it on my bedroom door, keeping the key in my pocket. Upon hearing Derek's car arrive the following evening, I activated the surveillance system to record. I witnessed Daphne engaging in a prolonged French kiss with her boss before exiting the car and waving as he drove away. I was seated in the living room, apparently engrossed in a book, when she entered. "Hi, honey. How was your weekend?" she asked, seeming anxious. Despite her attempt to conceal it, I could tell that she wasn't as composed as she appeared. I refrained from acknowledging her, keeping my focus on my book. "Fine. Continue with your sulking. Derek was spot on when he mentioned you would act this way, suggesting you lack the intelligence to understand my needs or the maturity to accept your shortcomings." She ascended the stairs. As she left, I began counting. 1, 2, 3. "Kenneth Morrison, what's going on? Did you put a lock on our bedroom?" "Correction, on my bedroom," I responded calmly. "All your belongings are in the guest bedroom. You'll be staying there until you find an apartment." "What the hell? Wait until I tell Derek about this. This was not part of the agreement." "Agreement? What agreement? I haven't agreed to any of your partner's nonsense. Either you stay in the guest room or leave. Perhaps Kramer's wife can accommodate you in her marital bed." She glared at me, not uttering a word, stormed into the guest room, and slammed the door. I followed her upstairs, yelling through the door. "Speaking of agreements, what was in it for me, by the way?" No response. I returned upstairs. After 15 minutes, my phone began buzzing with text messages from an unfamiliar number. "What's this I hear, cuck? You won't let Daphne into her own room. I thought I explained things clearly to you. Even someone like you should comprehend. For tonight, I'll overlook your childish crisis. Tomorrow, you'll prepare Daphne's favorite dinner and apologize for your behavior. If you behave the rest of the week, I'll permit her to be in bed with you next weekend. Fail to comply and you'll discover my threats are genuine. Follow my instructions. No questions. Clear." I couldn't believe what I was reading. This person bordered on being heartless, delusional, and foolish. I chose not to respond, but took a screenshot of the conversation and sent it to Harry. Harry responded 3 minutes later, saying, "Incredible. This guy thinks he's top-notch, but he's just a first-rate idiot. Keep the conversation intact and don't bother replying to him." Kramer continued to send a couple more acknowledgement requests, to which I remained silent. Eventually, he stopped reaching out. I didn't encounter Daphne again that evening. I went to bed, securing the door and leaving the recording system on. I texted one of my assistants, informing him of my late arrival the following day. I waited until the morning after Daphne had departed before getting up and preparing for the day. While having breakfast, I downloaded the recordings from my system overnight. Daphne hadn't left the guest room until that morning. She had used the guest bathroom for a shower and left without eating breakfast. Surprisingly, she hadn't attempted anything with my computer. As expected, I received a text from Claudia Milton. "Hi, Kenneth. Just confirming that the divorce papers will be served at Tenkodor this morning. I informed Harry as well. Have as good a day as possible considering everything." Before heading to the shop, I ensured my home system was still recording and set to send alerts to my phone. If activated, I had an 11 a.m. meeting with the architect to discuss final modifications for my current client. I kept myself busy with minor tasks until the meeting. I anticipated a call from Daphne shortly after being served, but it never came. At 10:45, I messaged Harry, expressing surprise at Daphne's lack of contact. "This means she's talked to Kramer about the divorce papers. They might already be scheming. I'll call Laura. Stay tuned," Harry replied. The meeting proceeded smoothly, allowing me to stay focused, surprisingly. I spent the remainder of the afternoon maintaining my tools and tidying up the shop. At 3:12 p.m., I received an alert on my cell phone. I texted Harry that the show was in motion. He responded with a thumbs up. I accessed my system and watched the live events unfolding in my house. Daphne had returned, accompanied by an unfamiliar man. They entered our home office and activated my computer. Minimal conversation was exchanged between them. The man spent a few minutes decrypting my password, then inserted a flash drive into my computer and engaged in suspicious activities for about 10 minutes. Thankfully, I captured clear images of his face. Meanwhile, Daphne went to the guest room and packed her belongings in garbage bags, as her suitcases were apparently in the master bedroom closet. Once the man completed his tasks, he shut down the computer and informed Daphne of his departure. She finished packing and left the premises. At 3:56 p.m., shortly after the recording ceased, Harry contacted me. "All right, Kenneth. Head home and act normally. I suspect they will involve the police tonight or tomorrow, so be prepared for an inspector's visit. Obtaining a search warrant takes a few hours, so anticipate their arrival tomorrow." "Could I get arrested?" I inquired. "It's a possibility. If it happens, maintain silence. Don't answer any questions. I've already reached out to Stephen Lindsay, a reliable criminal defense lawyer. I've shared all pertinent information, including the recordings. He assures me this will be the easiest case of the year," Harry assured. I provided Harry with the code to control my alarm system recording in case of an arrest. After some more discussion, we concluded our conversation. I felt extremely anxious as I drove home. The evening passed without any police visits, calls from Daphne, or unpleasant messages from Kramer. I made myself a sandwich and ate while watching TV. Although tempted to inform my parents about the situation, I decided to wait until the storm had passed. Explaining computer system tampering and cloud-stored videos to my mother seemed futile and likely to cause unnecessary worry. The next day, while I was at the store, I got another alert saying there was an intruder in my house. Following the same steps as before, I quickly messaged Harry and checked my security system. The police had entered my place and were trying to turn off the alarm. They seemed to have done it successfully because I lost communication. Harry told me he saw what happened and sent the images to Stephen Lindsay. About an hour later, 2 officers came to my shop and arrested me. They handcuffed me and took me away in a police car. They told me my rights and started asking questions, but I chose not to answer. When we got to the station, they took my phone and wallet and put me in a cell with 5 others. There wasn't much talking. Everyone stared at the floor tiles. After about 3 hours, a guard took me to a meeting room to see my lawyer. "What's going on?" I asked the guard. I hadn't told anyone who my lawyer was. The guard didn't say anything and left me alone in the room. 10 minutes later, Derek Kramer walked in. He had a big grin on his face and sat across from me without saying anything. I stared back at him, saying nothing. After he was satisfied with establishing his dominance, he finally spoke. "Now, do you understand the seriousness of the situation?" I stayed quiet. "I asked you a question, Morrison. Answer me, you insignificant bug." Again, I didn't respond. "It's your word against mine, Morrison. A carpenter versus one of the top lawyers in the city. Can you guess what will happen?" he asked, still smirking. Then he got up and left the room. "Okay, it seems like you need some time to process what I've told you. Let's meet again tomorrow morning to discuss further," he said before leaving the room. I was taken back to the cell, now with only 4 others. Later that day, another person came to see me. I was brought back to the same meeting room where a tall blonde man was waiting for me. With a stern expression and a no-nonsense demeanor, he stood up as I entered. "Good afternoon, Kenneth. Nice to meet you. I'm Stephen Lindsay. You can call me Stephen. Harry got in touch with me earlier today saying he had trouble reaching you. Given the situation, we figured you might have been arrested and brought here." I recounted all the events of the day, including the unsettling visit from Derek Kramer. Stephen seemed shocked, but he stayed silent. "Okay, you'll be in front of a judge tomorrow morning. Expect a high bail, but don't worry, Harry will take care of it. I know tonight will be tough, but stay strong. Both Harry and I are here for you. In the meantime, keep refusing to answer their questions. I've officially taken on your case, and I'll make sure Kramer doesn't bother you again." The next day, I appeared before the judge on charges of possessing illegal material involving children, maintaining my plea of not guilty. Bail was set, and I was released later that afternoon. I was restricted from leaving the city or contacting my soon-to-be ex-wife, Derek Kramer, or anyone from their office. but I could work in my shop. My phone and wallet were returned, and Stephen took me for a late lunch where we continued our conversation. I didn't say much at the police station yesterday because I was worried about confidentiality. But after making some calls and doing research, I found out some interesting things about Derek Kramer. Let me give you some reassuring information. Firstly, getting a search warrant takes time, and only after that can they review the found material and get an arrest warrant. In your case, you were brought in before they finished searching your house. Secondly, despite the restrictions on contacting me or Harry, Derek Kramer was allowed to see you. This strongly suggests that the whole thing was planned, which is definitely illegal. But Harry said Kramer has influence over many judges, I pointed out. Not all of them, he replied with a wink. You can't make so many friends without making some enemies. I have no clue what I'll find at home. I hope my wife and her scheming partner didn't take everything. Don't worry about that. Harry went to your place right after the police left, reactivated the system, and set it to record again. No one came. I went back to the shop to get my car, and then went home for a much-needed shower. The architect had left a message confirming the updated plan had been approved by the client. This was good news, as it meant I could go back to work the next day and keep my mind occupied. When I got home, I found a mess. Every inch had been searched. Besides the tampered computer, I knew they wouldn't find anything incriminating. As I cleaned up, I couldn't help but cry for the first time. Just a week ago, I was a happy man in what I thought was a stable marriage. Now I was a suspect in a crime, facing divorce, and manipulated by my wife's boss. What had I done to deserve this? At least there were no reporters bothering me. They were probably busy with the newly discovered multi-billion-dollar hole in public finances to care about someone like Kenneth. Towards the end of the following week, Stephen finally contacted me with some big news. All charges against me had been dropped. It seemed the assigned inspector, who was particularly sensitive to blackmail issues, wasn't someone to mess with. Despite Derek Kramer's attempts, the inspector swiftly filed charges against him for blackmail, evidence fabrication, and possessing illegal materials with children. As for Daphne, she would be facing conspiracy accusations related to these crimes. Shortly after talking to Stephen, Harry called and invited me to dinner that evening. While on my way to Harry's, Claudia Milton, my family law attorney, reached out to me. Kenneth, Daphne's lawyer, called and said she's ready to sign the divorce papers without changes, but with one condition. She wants a private hour-long meeting with you, suggesting it could be at my office. Although meeting Daphne was the last thing I wanted, I thought it might speed up the divorce process. So I agreed to Claudia's plan. The evening with Harry and Christine was a much-needed break, the first relaxing one in 2 weeks. Christine had prepared a delicious meal of coconut shrimp and rice, which left me feeling peaceful. Upon returning home, the meeting with Daphne was set for the following Wednesday, and despite being the sufferer in this scheme, I couldn't shake off my nerves. When I arrived, Claudia advised me in her office, "Kenneth, I'm not sure about her intentions, but I must warn you, she's facing criminal accusations. Don't give her any ammunition. Be careful of what you say. We can't search her for recording devices, so she might be recording you." "Okay, thanks for the heads up," I replied. Then I was led into a private meeting room where Daphne was already sitting. I expected to encounter the same spiteful and arrogant Daphne I'd known, but she seemed broken. Despite feeling compassionate, memories of her questionable interactions with Kramer quickly dispelled any sympathy I had. "Thank you for meeting with me, Kenneth. After everything, what could you possibly want to say to me?" Her tears began to flow. Daphne expressed regret and apologized to Kenneth for her past behavior, admitting she had been under Derek Kramer's influence. She mentioned feeling awakened upon learning about the dropped charges against Kenneth and the potential accusations they might face. This realization led her to feel deep remorse and shame, especially considering the insignificant nature of the incident. For the next 30 minutes, she continued to reflect on her behavior without asking for any information or probing me further. "I understand. It's over between us, Kenneth. If I were you, I'd seek a divorce too. I don't blame you for ending things. I've quit my job. I made it clear to Derek Kramer I never want to speak to him again. I've gone back to my parents' house and confessed everything. They're furious with me. Let's just say the atmosphere at home is anything but warm and welcoming. I looked at her quietly. Frankly, there was no smart comeback to all of this. She had created her own mess, and now she had to deal with the consequences. The months and maybe even years ahead will be tough for me, Kenneth. I'm not sure what life holds for me. My only hope is that eventually, after everything settles, we might have a chance to be friends. That's a long shot, Daphne. Very long. We'll see how it goes. Best of luck. I got up and left the room. Part of me still cared for her, but reconciliation was out of the question. Despite wanting revenge initially, circumstances had already made her miserable. She had learned her lesson, and there was no need for more punishment. Daphne made a deal by cooperating fully with authorities against Derek Kramer, which led her to move to another city. After that, I lost contact with her. When allegations against Kramer became public, 2 other men came forward, accusing him of blackmail. Kramer got a 12-year jail term as the police had recordings of all my interactions with him. My testimony wasn't needed. After Kramer was convicted, I sued him and what was left of his firm. And I got a $2 million settlement, with a good chunk going to Harry. Despite pretending to be outraged, I was happy to reward Harry for his invaluable help. My company is doing well, and I'm close to acquiring a specialty door manufacturer, which will improve our operations. With 6 employees who feel like family, I'm content. Harry and Christine invited me to a BBQ a few days after my divorce was finalized. There, I met Christine's younger sister, Kathy, and we hit it off immediately. We've been dating for a few weeks, and we'll see where it leads. Several weeks after settling the case against CBH and Kramer, I visited Kramer in jail, making sure the guard made him stay for our chat. I smirked as he entered, starting with a taunt. "What's up, cuck?" Kramer tried to leave, but the guard made him sit and listen. Ignoring his insults, I casually mentioned, "Oh, interesting preemptive strike. Heard your wife, Jessica, filed for divorce. Maybe I should ask her out for dinner and give her a memorable night." Furious, Kramer snapped, "You rogue, if you do that—" I cut him off. "Save your spit, idiot. I've done that already. Her hummingbird tattoo on her upper left thigh is quite lovely, isn't it, cuck?" He turned beet red. He was about to threaten me again, but then he realized it wouldn't help. Anyway, I wasn't there to talk about Jessica. I just wanted to let him know he's a fool who needs reminders of his own foolishness. Threatening a man in his own home and outlining consequences if he doesn't comply isn't exactly smart, is it? Even a carpenter would see that. "Let's say this time you're the one left in the dust." I laughed while he simmered with anger. "Oh, and didn't you say certain materials were illegal for a simple man like me, but fine for a powerful figure like yourself? Your power amazes me. Perhaps it's the jumpsuit. It suits you." Kramer was so mad he seemed close to a breakdown. "Before I go, I have something Jessica and Daphne thought you might find enlightening." I handed him a folded paper. He unfolded it and looked at it. "What the hell is this?" he asked. "Exactly." I chuckled. "It's a depiction of female gender organ, commonly referred to as a private part." I pointed to a spot on the drawing. "They wanted you to know that's the arousal point."
It's perfect. A scene out of a fairy tale. Emily and James's engagement party sparkled with joy, love filling the air. As they shared a kiss under twinkling lights, Emily felt her future was bright, but a nagging thought about James's evasiveness regarding his grandmother lingered. Wedding preparations were in full swing, but James's reluctance to involve his grandmother troubled Emily. Driven by curiosity, she visited the grandmother's rundown home, discovering she was neglected and heartbroken. Confronting James, Emily learned of his cruel indifference. Her world shattered. Emily called off the wedding. In the end, she found solace in caring for the grandmother, forming an unexpected bond. They found happiness together, proving that compassion can lead to new beginnings. What would you do if you discovered a dark secret about someone you loved? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hello my friends, I hope all you are fine. This is Narrative Stories channel. Let's start this story. The night was perfect, a scene straight out of a fairy tale. The elegant ballroom was decorated with twinkling fairy lights, soft music played in the background, and the air was filled with laughter and joy. Emily, in a stunning red dress, floated from guest to guest, her radiant smile lighting up the room. James, looking dashing in his tailored suit, stayed close by her side, his arm around her waist. The love between them was palpable, and everyone could see it. As the evening progressed, the couple shared a kiss under the glow of the chandeliers, a moment captured by their friends and family, who cheered and applauded. To Emily and James, the perfect couple, someone toasted, and the room echoed with clinking glasses and heartfelt congratulations. Emily's heart was full. She believed she had found her soulmate, the man she would spend the rest of her life with. Little did she know, a shocking discovery was just around the corner, one that would turn her world upside down. The couple moved through the room, receiving warm wishes and hugs from loved ones. Emily's best friend, Sarah, pulled her aside, beaming. "I'm so happy for you, Emily. James is a great guy. You're going to have an amazing life together." Emily nodded, her eyes shining. "I know, Sarah. I feel so lucky. Everything is just perfect." But even amidst the celebration, a nagging thought tugged at the back of Emily's mind. She had noticed that James never spoke much about his family, particularly his grandmother, who was supposedly very dear to him. Whenever she brought it up, James would change the subject or give a vague response. At the time, she brushed it off, thinking it was just his way of dealing with family matters. However, something about it didn't sit right with her. The days turned into weeks, and wedding preparations were in full swing. Emily immersed herself in the whirlwind of planning, eager to create the perfect day. She spent hours trying on wedding dresses, each more beautiful than the last, visiting potential venues, and coordinating with florists and caterers. Her friends were by her side, helping her make decisions and sharing in her excitement. Yet, as the plans progressed, Emily couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. James seemed distant whenever she mentioned his grandmother. One evening, as they were looking through the guest list, Emily brought it up again. "James, I noticed your grandmother isn't on the list. I thought she was really important to you." James looked up from the list, a shadow crossing his face. "She is, but she's not well. It would be too much for her to travel and be a part of all this. Let's not worry about it." Emily frowned, but decided not to press the issue. She wanted everything to be perfect and didn't want to cause any unnecessary tension. However, the seed of doubt had been planted. She couldn't understand why James would be so reluctant to involve his grandmother, especially if she meant so much to him. As the wedding date drew nearer, Emily's curiosity grew. She felt a strong urge to meet James's grandmother, to understand why he was so evasive about her. Despite James's reassurances, Emily decided she needed to see for herself. She wanted to know the woman who had supposedly played a significant role in his life. Little did she know, her decision would uncover a heartbreaking truth. One sunny afternoon, Emily found herself driving through the outskirts of town, following the directions to James's grandmother's house. The neighborhood grew less affluent as she drove, the houses smaller and more run down. Her heart pounded with anticipation and a touch of anxiety. She wondered what kind of woman she was about to meet and why James had been so reluctant to involve her in their lives. When she finally arrived, Emily was taken aback by the sight of the small, dilapidated house. The garden was overgrown with weeds, and the paint was peeling off the walls. It was a stark contrast to the image she had of James's family. She parked her car and walked up the narrow path to the front door, feeling a mix of curiosity and trepidation. Emily knocked gently on the door, and after a moment, it creaked open. An elderly woman stood there, her face lined with age and weariness, but her eyes still bright. "Hello, can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with surprise. "Hi, I'm Emily, James's fiancée," Emily replied with a warm smile. "I wanted to meet you and maybe talk about the wedding." The grandmother's eyes widened in surprise and then filled with tears. "Oh, my dear, come in, please." She led Emily into a small, cluttered living room, offering her a seat. "I haven't seen James in so long. He told me he was getting married, but I didn't think I'd ever meet you." As they talked, Emily learned that James's grandmother had been living alone, struggling with health and finances. James had stopped visiting her months ago, saying she was a burden. The more Emily listened, the more her heart broke. How could the man she loved, the man who was so kind and caring to her, treat his own grandmother so cruelly? "I thought he loved me," the grandmother said, tears streaming down her face. "But he told me he couldn't take care of me anymore. I've been managing on my own, but it's been so hard." Emily's mind raced as she tried to process what she was hearing. She felt a surge of anger and sadness. This was not the James she knew, the man she had agreed to marry. How could he be so heartless to his own flesh and blood? That evening, Emily returned home with a heavy heart. She felt betrayed and confused. She loved James, but she couldn't ignore what she had learned. She decided she had to confront him, to hear his side of the story, and understand why he had treated his grandmother so poorly. As they sat in their living room, the tension was palpable. Emily took a deep breath and began. "James, I went to visit your grandmother today." James's face hardened immediately. "Why did you do that, Emily? I told you she wasn't well." "She's more than not well, James," Emily replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "She's living in terrible conditions, neglected and heartbroken. How could you do this to her?" James's eyes flashed with anger. "She never did anything for me growing up. Why should I care about her now? She's just an old woman who expects too much." Emily felt a cold chill run down her spine. This was not the man she thought she knew. "James, she's your grandmother. She needs your help. How can you be so heartless?" "Heartless," James scoffed. "I've done enough. She can't expect me to drop everything for her. I have my own life to live." Emily's heart broke as she realized the truth. James was not the compassionate, caring man she thought he was. She had to make a decision, one that would change her life forever. Emily spent the next few days in a daze, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She loved James, but she couldn't ignore what she had discovered. She couldn't marry a man who could be so cruel to his own family. After much soul-searching, she knew what she had to do. One evening, Emily sat alone in her room, looking at her engagement ring. Tears streamed down her face as she thought about the future she had envisioned, the life she had planned with James. She knew she had to end it. With a heavy heart, she packed her bags, knowing she couldn't stay any longer. Emily called James to meet her. When he arrived, she took a deep breath and began. "James, I can't marry you. I can't be with someone who can treat their own grandmother so heartlessly." James's face twisted with anger. "You're leaving me over this? You're throwing everything away because of her?" Emily nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, because it's not just about her. It's about who you are. I can't be with someone who lacks compassion and kindness." As Emily walked away, she felt a mix of sadness and relief. She knew she had made the right decision, even though it was one of the hardest things she had ever done. In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself visiting James's grandmother regularly. She helped her clean the house, cooked meals for her, and kept her company. The old woman's eyes began to sparkle with a new light, her spirits lifted by Emily's kindness. One afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, the grandmother turned to Emily and said, "Thank you, my dear. You've given me hope and happiness I thought I had lost forever." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart she hadn't felt in a long time. "You've given me a new purpose," she replied. "We're family now, and I promise I'll always be here for you." The two women, once strangers, had formed a bond that went beyond blood. Emily had found a new path, one filled with compassion and love. She had lost a fiancé, but gained a family. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Emily and the grandmother sat on a bench, content and happy. They had found each other in the most unexpected way, proving that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most fulfilling journeys. To Emily and the grandmother, sitting on a bench in a park, smiling and content, ***, Voiceover, asterisk, asterisk. What would you do if you discovered a dark secret about someone you loved? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories. Thank you for being a part of Narrative Stories. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We are committed to bringing you the best in storytelling. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
I usually don't ask this early, but if you could like the video and subscribe, it would mean a lot. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support can really help get my content out there. Thanks, Jacob Roberts had always believed in the solid foundation of his marriage. He and Emma had been together for nearly a decade, 10 years of laughter, struggles, and shared dreams. They had met in their early 20s in Melbourne when Jacob was working as a junior engineer on a construction project, and Emma was fresh out of university, just getting started in marketing. Emma's ambition had always been one of the things Jacob admired most about her. Her drive was infectious, her charm undeniable. She knew how to navigate the corporate world, and soon she climbed the ladder faster than anyone expected. By her mid-30s, she was a senior marketing executive for Sanderson Enterprises, one of Australia's biggest real estate development companies. Jacob, on the other hand, was content as a construction manager. While his work wasn't glamorous, it was steady and gave them the comfortable lifestyle they both enjoyed. However, things had started to shift in recent months. Emma had been distant, more preoccupied, always coming home late with the excuse of work dinners or urgent client meetings. Her phone, once carelessly left on the kitchen counter, was now always within her reach, face down. Jacob didn't want to be the suspicious husband, but something wasn't right, and he could feel it. It all started innocuously enough. Emma had started mentioning her boss, Greg Sanderson, more frequently. She described him as charismatic and brilliant, someone who had revolutionized the company. At first, Jacob didn't think much of it. It was normal for Emma to talk about work. But as the mentions became more frequent, Jacob noticed a change in her tone, a warmth, a respect that bordered on admiration. Greg was not just her boss. He was someone she looked up to. Still, Jacob brushed it off as a professional admiration. But then, the work dinners became a regular occurrence. At first, they were once or twice a month. Then, it was every week, and lately it felt like she was out more than she was home. Jacob couldn't shake the growing pit in his stomach. He tried talking to Emma about it, but she always had a plausible explanation. The real estate market was booming, Greg had big plans, and the team needed to work late to keep up. Jacob wanted to believe her. After all, they had been together for so long, and trust had never been an issue before. But one evening, while scrolling through his social media feed, Jacob stumbled upon something that made his heart sink. A photo had been posted by one of Emma's colleagues. It was a candid shot from earlier that day at a company event. Emma was in the background, standing close to Greg. The two of them were laughing, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that felt intimate, too intimate for a boss and an employee. Jacob stared at the photo for a long time, his mind spinning with questions. Was he imagining things? Was he being paranoid? Or was there something more going on between Emma and Greg? He tried to push the thoughts away, but the seed of doubt had been planted. A week later, Jacob's suspicions deepened. Emma came home late one night, her cheeks flushed, eyes bright with excitement. She mentioned Greg had invited her to a small gathering at his house that weekend. A private, casual get-together with just a few of the senior staff. Jacob had never been invited to any of Greg's parties before, and when he asked if he could come along, Emma hesitated. "I'm not sure it's that kind of party," she said, her tone cautious. "It's more of a work thing. Greg just wants the team to bond, you know? It might be awkward if you're there." Jacob's stomach twisted. Awkward? Why would it be awkward? He had always gotten along with Emma's co-workers in the past, but there was something in her voice, a subtle unease, that made Jacob suspicious. Well, I'm sure Greg wouldn't mind. I'd love to meet the team and see where you've been spending all your time, Jacob replied, trying to keep his voice light. Emma's smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough to confirm what Jacob already suspected. She didn't want him there. Why? Was she hiding something? The next day, Jacob tried to put it out of his mind. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe Emma was right. It was just a work thing, and he'd feel out of place. But as the weekend approached, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. On Saturday, Emma left the house in a flurry of excitement, dressed in a sleek gold dress that hugged her figure perfectly. She had spent hours getting ready, more effort than Jacob had seen her put into a work event in years. She kissed him on the cheek and waved goodbye, her smile too bright, too rehearsed. As soon as she was out the door, Jacob made a decision. He was going to find out the truth. Greg Sanderson's house was nothing short of a mansion. Located in the affluent suburb of Mosman, overlooking the Sydney harbor, it was the kind of place that screamed wealth and power. The kind of place Jacob had never felt comfortable in. As he parked his car a few streets away, Jacob felt a mix of anger, anxiety, and dread swirling inside him. He wasn't sure what he was going to find, but he had to know. He had to see for himself what Emma was hiding. The party was already in full swing when Jacob arrived. He slipped through the side gate, careful not to draw attention to himself. The backyard was filled with people, men in tailored suits, women in designer dresses, all laughing and mingling as if they didn't have a care in the world. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and cigars, the sound of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. Jacob scanned the crowd, his heart racing. And then he saw her. Emma was standing near the pool, her arm casually draped around Greg's shoulders. They were deep in conversation, their faces close, too close. Jacob watched as Greg whispered something in her ear, and Emma laughed, her hand resting on his chest. His stomach churned. He felt frozen, his feet rooted to the ground as he watched them. The intimacy between them was undeniable, and it felt like a punch to the gut. The woman he had loved for so long, the woman he had trusted with everything, was standing there, looking at another man the way she used to look at him. For a moment, Jacob thought about turning around and leaving. Maybe it would be easier not to confront her, not to face the truth. But something inside him snapped. He walked toward them, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached, Emma turned her head and their eyes met. Her smile faltered and her face drained of color. She hadn't expected him to be there. She hadn't expected to be caught. "Jacob, what are you doing here?" Emma's voice trembled, her eyes wide with shock. "I could ask you the same thing," Jacob replied, his voice low and steady. "But I already know the answer." The noise of the party seemed to fade away as the three of them stood there, the weight of the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the air. Greg shifted uncomfortably, his confident demeanor crumbling under the intensity of the moment. He opened his mouth to speak, but Jacob cut him off. "This is between me and my wife," Jacob said coldly, his eyes never leaving Emma's. Emma's lips parted as if she were about to say something, but no words came out. The truth was written all over her face. There was no denying it now. She had betrayed him, and they both knew it. Jacob felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief wash over him. He had given her everything, his trust, his love, his loyalty, and she had thrown it all away for this. Without another word, Jacob turned and walked away, leaving Emma and Greg standing there in stunned silence. Jacob drove home in silence, his mind racing with thoughts and emotions. He felt numb, as if the world had shifted beneath his feet and nothing made sense anymore. How had it come to this? How had the woman he loved, the woman he had built his life with, betrayed him so completely? When he arrived home, the house felt empty and cold. He sat down on the couch, staring at the wall, his mind replaying the events of the night over and over again. He couldn't believe it. Emma, his Emma, the woman he had trusted with everything, had been lying to him for months. The next few days were a blur. Emma came home late that night, but Jacob didn't confront her. He couldn't bring himself to face her just yet. He needed time to process everything, to figure out what he was going to do. Emma, for her part, didn't push him. She seemed to sense that something had shifted between them. But she didn't bring it up. They moved through the house like strangers, each lost in their own thoughts. A week later, Jacob finally confronted her. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with guilt and regret. "I don't know," she said, her voice shaking. "It just happened. I never meant for it to go this far." Jacob felt a wave of anger rise up inside him. "You never meant for it to go this far? Emma, you've been lying to me for months. How could you do this?" Emma broke down in tears, but Jacob didn't feel sympathy for her. Not this time. She had made her choices, and now they had to face the consequences. Chapter 5. Moving Forward. In the weeks that followed, Jacob struggled to come to terms with what had happened. The betrayal cut deep, and the trust between him and Emma was shattered. They tried to talk, to work through it, but every conversation ended in anger and tears. Eventually, Jacob realized that their marriage couldn't be saved. The damage was too great, and he couldn't live with the constant doubt and pain. They decided to separate, and Jacob moved out of the house they had shared for so long. It was a difficult and painful process, but over time Jacob began to heal. He found solace in his work, in his friends, and in the small moments of peace that came with being on his own. He learned to let go of the anger, to forgive himself for not seeing the signs sooner, and to move forward with his life. In the end, Jacob realized that sometimes the people we love aren't who we think they are. Betrayal hurts, but it also reveals the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And sometimes, the end of something broken is the start of something new and beautiful. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, feel free to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. We'll see you in the next one.